I've seen a lot of CEOs, they pivot their businesses and they adapt to the new changes and all that.
Yeah.
And then some haven't. You know, there's a lot that stay behind. But what do you think what are the keys for those who have succeeded, especially in times like these?
It's really funny. I'm about to say like, hey, you know what? I remember when COVID happened as it was like a long time ago. And it kind of is a long time ago, right? 2020, March. I remember everybody was scrambling then, dude. I think the worst Wednesday, and I still remember it, middle of March, the worst Wednesday, one of my buddy who was doing $21 million in revenue lost about $9.5 million in a span of 4 hours. Everybody was calling to cancel. He did events, and he was actually hosting most of the events out in Vegas, and at that time no event was happening. But he had already, put down the deposit. He had already hired people. He had already bought stuff, and people were canceling left and right. And he lost literally $9.5 million in booked revenue, in committed revenue, in a matter of like 4 hours, and then continue to lose more, throughout the next week. And I remember he ended. I mean, we eventually had to shut that company down. It was a $20 million company that he's been built for like the last 10 years, and it just went away, overnight. I think in that case, there wasn't anything he could have done, but he didn't shut that company down in a bad way, meaning he's been a client of mine for like 7 or 8 years, right? And and he's one of those CEOs that's always been on top of their numbers, and we always work with him. And the funny thing is that in our cash forecasting, right, we always have this thing goes, hey, if shit hit the fan and your revenue went to 0, right, how does that play out? The not so funny thing is that no one ever expected that, right? Every time we put that on there, every time we review that with our CEOs on a monthly basis, people are always like, yeah, that's if shit hit the fan and like our revenue went to 0, but when the fuck is that gonna happen? Well, guess what? It happened in March 2020.
Yeah.
And so when it did happen, we actually had a plan. We knew exactly how much cash we had, right? We knew exactly how much obligation we have. We know how to wind it down. And that was a smooth landing. Like, we had to lay off people, and it fucking sucked, right? But he didn't go bankrupt. He didn't just like went belly up and like, he's owing a bunch of money and he literally just had to wind down his business earlier than he expected. That speaks a lot of volume, is that he was ready and he knew. And if I looked across, most of our clients who were on top of their financials, and most of them were okay, right? Because we had that built in. We had the cash forecast built in. Everybody knew where they stand. Everybody knew what was happening. I don't think no one expected it to be that bad, but we were able to navigate it. It wasn't like people were freaking out. I remember when that was happening, there were companies that were freaking out because they had no fucking clue. And all they can do is just like react. And it's almost like knee-jerk reaction, right? They gotta do something to feel like they're in charge. But in crisis like that, I always said, the CEO, you're the captain of the ship. You have to stay level-headed. You gotta be super calm. You can't be running around screaming and going, oh my God, this shit's burning down. I think that's the time that leadership really shows, when everybody looks to you for guidance. Right? And who do you look towards, right? And I feel like at that time, if you knew your numbers, if you're just on top of it, you knew how much cash you got, you knew where the company stand, you knew what was happening, and you have a good forecast built in, I think all these guys were okay. It wasn't like they weren't affected. I think COVID affected everybody, but I think they were able to navigate, right? They were able to keep calm, right? And really let their leadership shine, because at the back, they know worst case scenario, this is what it looked like. So they were able to navigate from there. There were a few businesses that unfortunately we just couldn't do anything about, that we just had to shut it down, but it wasn't crazy. It wasn't burning. We had to land, right? We had to shut it down, but we landed okay. Like we landed on the Hudson River, right? Like Captain Sully did. But then most people were able to manage their business and really navigate it and really pivot it or do whatever it is that they got to do to take the company back and eventually out of that pandemic safely. And in fact, a lot of them are prospering this year, because of it. And I think they made the necessary changes. If you're on top of your numbers, if you're on top of your financials, if you're on top of your cascading metrics and your vital numbers, I think that's the key to allow you to not be affected too much emotionally so that you're able to guide your team and navigate your business.